Welcome back, folks. Today we're going to be covering the Wrestler Archetype, a personal favorite of mine. It was introduced in the Grand Bazaar and allows you to do all of the wacky wrestling stuff of your dreams. It's made for characters who want to be grappling specialists. And while you don't have to take inspiration from all the wild personalities of pro wrestlers, you can if you want. Let's just jump right into things, shall we, rather than waffling around at the start. The wrestler dedication is very, very simple. You have to be trained in unarmed attacks and unarmored defense and athletics. This is really simple for every single class to be able to qualify for, since all classes are trained in unarmed attacks and defense. It's just a standard thing that every single character has, meaning that you just have to be trained in athletics. Once you take this dedication, you immediately become an expert in athletics, and you get the Titan Wrestler skill feat, which allows for you to be able to grapple, trip, or shove larger and larger creatures. Titan Wrestler for a wrestler is, of course, great, since now you'll be able to use all of your cool wrestler abilities on huge or larger creatures. Now you aren't locked out of a lot of your interesting features just because you're fighting a big enemy. Plus, who doesn't want to suplex the Tarrasque? Additionally, you don't take the circumstance penalty for making lethal attacks with your unarmed attacks like normal, and you get a +2 circumstance bonus to your Fortitude DC when resisting attempts to grapple or swallow you whole. This bonus is fairly situational, but it can be very helpful for whenever it comes up, since no one really wants to be swallowed whole, and if you do, that's a little weird. Unfortunately, though, a lot of creatures won't be grabbing you using athletics, since many creatures automatically grab you with their attack since it has the grab ability. For instance, giant Venus flytraps have the improved grab trait, meaning that as soon as they hit you with a tentacle, they can immediately grab you. Which means that, yeah, this bonus won't actually help you resist their attempts to grab you. But it can be helpful if you run into another enemy who likes to grapple you the normal way. Overall, you get a ton for taking this dedication, and it has great value when taken purely on its own, but it gets even better once you include all of the other feats. Combat Grab becomes available at level 4, and is actually a fighter feat. It has the press trait, meaning that you can only use it whenever you have already attacked on that turn. You attack an enemy as an action whenever you have a free hand, and if the strike hits, then you can automatically grab the target with that free hand, giving them the grabbed condition. This is a great way to compress your actions, giving you 2 for the price of 1s. The press trait is the real limiting factor here, though, since having a multiple attack penalty will reduce the likelihood of actually hitting with Combat Grab in the first place. Fighters and Flurry Rush Rangers will be able to deal with their multiple attack penalty a bit better, though, due to having a higher attack bonus or a lower multiple attack penalty respectively. Also, using an agile weapon is a must for any single action with the press trait. Overall, Combat Grab is pretty good, since you have to be grabbing an enemy to use most of your other wrestler abilities, so it's a nice way to get that without having to roll a normal check to grapple. But it also doesn't have the chance of restraining the enemy, which is one of the most debilitating conditions in the entirety of the game, so maybe normal grappling might be a bit better. Crushing Grab is a monk feat that can be somewhat helpful, though its usefulness does fade off a bit as you level up. Whenever you successfully grapple a target with the grapple action, you can deal bludgeoning damage equal to your strength modifier to the target. And this damage can be non-lethal if you want. This is nice if you're going to be grappling a lot, and considering you're a wrestler, you probably are going to be grappling a lot, but as you level up, this damage becomes a lot less and less relevant. 4 or 5 damage is alright at level 4 whenever you take this, but it can be kind of hard to notice it at level 15 when everything has like over 200 health. It's a pretty good feat, and it can really help you out whenever you're dealing with lower level creatures. But overall, yeah, 4 or 5 damage is not gonna be a huge deal breaker at higher levels. Disengaging Twist is unique to the Wrestler archetype, and it makes you an absolute nightmare to actually grab. Whenever a creature gives you the grabbed or restrained condition, you can spend a reaction to immediately attempt an escape action using athletics. You also get a +2 circumstance bonus on this roll, meaning that you will be very, very likely to succeed, since as a wrestler, you're probably keeping your athletics at the maximum proficiency that you can, due to, wanting to grapple things really well, meaning that a +2 circumstance bonus on top of that to escape is a very, very good chance of success. So, yeah. Getting grabbed or restrained can be really frustrating since the escape action has the attack trait, meaning that once you successfully get out of someone's grapple, you will take a penalty at actually grappling them. This is a fantastic feat for countering people who are trying to grapple you, and on a plus side, it actually also works on creatures who grab you using the grab or improved grab trait, rather than the grapple action, since it only triggers whenever you gain the grabbed or restrained condition. So yeah, this is just the "no, I'm the only one who's allowed to grapple" feat. Elbow Breaker is the first feat from the wrestler that seems and sounds incredibly inhumane, so if you take it, don't expect your image in the party to be a super friendly sort of image. It's a single action that functions similar to the disarm action. You can only use it against someone who is grabbed or restrained by you, though, so it is a little bit more limited. As a single action, you make an unarmed attack roll against the person who is grappled. On a success, in addition to doing your normal damage, you weaken the grip on a held item. Until the start of their turn, attempts to disarm the opponent of that particular item get a +2 circumstance bonus, and they take a -2 circumstance penalty on all attacks with that item. This is alright if you have another party member who wants to disarm the target, but since it goes away at the start of their turn, it likely won't actually impact their actions all that much. If you critically succeed, though, you knock the item out of their hand entirely on top of dealing double damage. It falls onto the ground in their space, so you will probably have to pick it up if you want to, stop them from just picking it up again. This is really fantastic, since it's an unarmed melee strike. This means that fighters can be kings of succeeding, and flurry rangers can also reduce their multiple attack penalties, so if they have to grapple and then use Elbow Breaker on someone, they're a lot more likely to critically hit. Also, monks in general will be better for a lot of these feats due to being able to enter a stance to make their unarmed strikes a lot more damaging. Overall, this is just better than the disarm action, because you get to deal damage with it, and you might have a higher odd of success with an unarmed attack rather than an athletics check. You might not actually break their arm, because you don't stop them from using it, but, well, it still sounds real bad. Snagging Strike is another feat taken from the fighter. It allows for you to strike with a weapon or unarmed strike in one hand, and use a free hand to grab onto that enemy to throw them off temporarily, making them flat-footed until the start of your next turn, or until they're not within reach. This is alright, but there are, some other ways that you might want to apply flat-footed, like, say, grappling. This feat isn't bad by any means, and it can be a very consistent way of applying flat-footed, but it isn't super interesting, and it doesn't really synergize particularly well with a lot of the other abilities of the archetype, since almost all of those rely on grappling, and this just applies flat-footed. Suplex is an inherently funny feat, and probably one of the feats that you are taking this archetype to get. As an action, when you're grappling someone, you flex your entire body and throw them over your head into the ground behind you, slamming them into the ground. You make an unarmed strike against the person that you have restrained or grabbed. On a success, they land prone, and on a critical success, they are prone, and they also take an additional 2d6 damage. Regardless of the result of your roll, they are no longer grabbed after you suplex them. This is an alright feat, but the way that it only really works on enemies that you're already grabbing means that you're going to have to deal with multiple attack penalty. So, if you grapple someone on one turn and then suplex them on the same turn, you're going to have to deal with multiple attack penalty. And the other option is to grapple them on one turn, then risk them escaping before you suplex them. So it's up to you to decide how you exactly want to use this. Regardless of how good this feat though, and it is pretty good, it's almost required due to how just hilarious the idea of suplexing people is. Clinch Strike is for the Vindictive Wrestler. It's a reaction for whenever someone that you are grabbing or restraining successfully uses the escape action. You can then spend your reaction and you can instantly make an unarmed strike against them. This is nice and simple and a really mean move. Of course, monks are probably going to have the best unarmed strikes, so they're probably going to get the most out of this, but a fighter might be more accurate than them, so really any character can make good use out of this as long as you've got a decent unarmed strike. Running Tackle is a simple feat that allows you to spend 2 actions to stride and make an unarmed attack, and if you hit with that unarmed attack, then you can immediately attempt to shove the target. Getting 3 actions for the price of 2 is always going to be nice, even if shove isn't always the most useful maneuver in every situation. Also, your bonus with your shove will be reduced from your multiple attack penalty because you already made a strike this turn. Additionally, Running Tackle also has the open trait, meaning that you can't use any other attacks before using it, which, to be fair, you probably don't want to because you're going to be making 2 attack rolls when doing Running Tackle, so you don't want those to be at a penalty. Overall, it's an alright feat, but there are a ton of fantastic level 8 feats for the wrestler, so it's up to you whether or not this is worth it for you. Strangle is the next morally dubious feat that the wrestler gets access to. It's a single action, unarmed melee strike that you can only use against someone who is grabbed or restrained by you. If you hit, you get a circumstance bonus to the damage roll equal to the number of weapon damage dice that you deal, and the target can barely talk until the start of its next turn or until they escape. They can barely make a hoarse whisper, and they must succeed at a DC 10 flat check or lose any action that requires speech. If that action has the manipulate trait, like casting a spell with both somatic and verbal components, then they also have to make a DC 10 flat check. This is fantastic for absolutely ruining spellcasters, but it's also great for stealth takedowns. Now you can choke out a guard and they can't alert anyone else while you beat them unconscious. And you can also suplex them into the ground because that's, of course, a very stealthy maneuver. Submission Hold is a kind of weird feat that allows you to debuff targets that you already have grabbed or restrained. You attempt an athletics check to grapple a target that you already have grabbed or restrained, and on a success, the target is enfeebled 1 until the end of their next turn. On a critical success, they are instead enfeebled 2 until the end of their next turn, and are then enfeebled 1 for a minute afterwards. This is alright, but once you have to start dealing with multiple attack penalties, then getting a critical success isn't actually all that likely, so you might not be able to apply the longer lasting enfeebled condition all too often. It's up to you whether or not this is worth it, because it's a bit of a gamble, because if a target is already grappled, then you're probably going to have to deal with a multiple attack penalty for this, meaning that it might not always be helpful. Although it probably will make it a bit harder for creatures to get out of a grapple that you are putting them in, though. Whirling Throw is honestly my favorite feat in all of Pathfinder. It comes from the monk class, and it is alone enough a reason to play a monk or a wrestler. As a single action, whenever you have someone grabbed or restrained, you roll an athletics check against their fortitude DC. You take a -2 penalty if they are 1 size larger than you, and a -4 if they're any larger. And you get a +2 if they're 1 size smaller than you, or a +4 if they are even smaller. On a success, you can throw them up to 10 feet plus 5 feet times your strength modifier. So if you have a +4, then that's a total of a 30-foot throw. They take damage equally to your strength modifier plus 1d6 per 10 feet that they flew once they land. If you critically succeed, then they also land prone, so you can throw them a certain amount of distance, they take some damage, and they land prone on a crit. If you fail, though, you don't throw them at all, but they still remain grabbed, which is amazing. If you critically fail, then they're no longer grabbed and they don't move. This feat has all different kinds of uses, and they're all good, like genuinely they are good, and hilarious. First, this doesn't have the attack trait. meaning that you can do this as your last action with no penalty. You can grab someone, then suplex them, then throw them across the entire map. Actually, not suplexing because that breaks a grapple, but that bad example on my part. Additionally, this is just guaranteed damage, meaning that if someone is really, really low but you don't have a way to exactly hit them, then you can just yeet them across the map to finish them off. Also, if there are any environmental hazards, be they hostile creatures or cliffs, then you can just throw enemies to their doom. I love absolutely everything about this feat, both in that it is incredibly fun mechanically, while also being very, very good mechanically. Speaking of insane feats, Aerial Piledriver really feels like you're just being mean. It takes 2 actions, and it can only be used against people that you're grappling or restraining, just like most of these feats, but it allows you to make an unarmed strike by jumping into the air, bringing your poor victim with you. You then crash into the ground, making an unarmed strike against them. This strike deals an additional 1d6 additional damage per weapon damage die you have, and on success, the target lands prone and is still grappled. If you fail though, they're no longer grappled, and if you critically fail, then they're no longer grappled, and you're prone. It's high risk, high reward, and if you critically hit, then you can really, really ruin someone's day by rolling a truly absurd amount of dice. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can do with this. Spine Breaker sounds really bad, and that's because it's really bad. It should probably land you on an ethics board, but you don't completely break their spine. It's pretty much the submission hold feat, where you can make a check to grapple, but instead of grappling someone, which they're already grappled, so it wouldn't really do anything, instead you give them the clumsy condition. Clumsy 1 on a success that lasts until the end of their turn, and Clumsy 2 until the end of their turn, and then Clumsy 1 for a minute afterwards on a critical success. Enfeebled is great since it reduces AC, but it might not affect a lot of creatures' attack rolls or damage rolls, since a lot of creatures don't use their dexterity for that. But yeah, it's good. It sounds absolutely horrific, because then you can, bane someone. But yeah, if you want to take this, then you can get a lot of usefulness out of this, because debuffing someone on top of grappling them is a great way to ruin their day. Inescapable Grasp is basically a big middle finger to spellcasters. Now, if someone tries to teleport out of a grapple that you've started, using anything with a teleportation effect, not just spells, they have to succeed at a DC 15 flat check, or they fail to teleport, as you somehow grab them so hard that they can't instantaneously move. To get even stupider, if someone tries to escape whenever they're under the effects of the Freedom of Movement spell, they also have to succeed at a DC 15 flat check. If they fail that flat check, then they have to roll normally like a peasant, rather than automatically succeeding. Now you're so good at grappling that magic specifically designed to stop people from being grappled has a 75% chance of failure. If that isn't a sign that you've made it, I don't know what is. Formlock is a weird feat that is extraordinarily situational, and probably won't see all that much use in a lot of campaigns. As a single action whenever you're grappling someone, you can use athletics to attempt to counteract a polymorph effect that someone is under. Once you attempt this check, they're then immune to Formlock, dispelling or counteracting polymorph effects for 1 day. This is just weird, since polymorph effects aren't all that common really, so running into one isn't gonna happen all that often. I do love the idea of you picking up a wild-shaped druid, though, and then wringing the polymorph out of them like water out of a rag. It's a really funny mental image, but it might not come up all too often. Overall, I feel like it's pretty obvious that I absolutely adore this archetype. It's a joy to read through and to play personally, because I've actually played a wrestler. Basically, every martial class can make a fantastic wrestler. Monks have fantastic unarmed attacks, and have some great feats to improve grappling, like, say, mixed maneuvers and flurry of maneuvers, because you can get a lot out of having a good athletics with those feats. Flare Rangers can reduce their multiple attack penalties a ridiculous amount, which can make a lot of these feats a lot easier to use, while Fighters will be more accurate with their unarmed strikes than anyone else in the entire game. Barbarians get some fantastic feats for grappling, and Gymnast Swashbucklers also get some great bonuses, like reducing their multiple attack penalty on maneuvers and rolling twice and taking the better on grabs. Overall, wrestlers are great, and you really can't go wrong with it as long as you've got a decent strength and a good athletics proficiency. Go ruin your GM's day, since nothing makes that happen faster than their cool boss monster getting put in a headlock and then suplexed out of a window. Thanks for watching. This has been an absolute blast to make, and I hope that you enjoyed watching it. If you have any constructive criticism, then I'd love to see it down below in a comment. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, then a like or subscribe down below would really help me realize that people actually appreciate what I put out. Also, it would tell YouTube that what I make is good and would recommend it to more people, so I would really appreciate it. Until I see you next, live a wonderful life.